Good afternoon, everyone. Samantha Reece from the Australian Apartment Advocacy. I'm delighted to have you here today with us to talk about environmental initiatives in apartments. And we have Ralf Harding on the line from Altair Apartments, Nathan Hage from Zinc Apartments. But Nathan, I think you've been travelling. Are you not in Sydney at the moment?
I'm back. I was travelling. I was in the delightful Melbourne for a disappointing AFL game.
Ah, okay.
Very disappointing.
So obviously Sydney supporters. It was difficult because I was watching that game and I thought, are they going to do a Freo Dockers and come back and beat the Cats? And I was hopeful. And then I was not hopeful. But the highlight for me was actually, in fact, watching Robbie Williams perform in a hot pink outfit and ensemble. That was wasn't that worth going to watch the game, guys?
Well, fortunately,
it certainly went downhill from there.
Well, you're in unison about that. And obviously we've got Phil Baxter from WINconnect, who obviously is a specialist in also electric vehicle charging stations and embedded networks. And I've obviously asked him to join us because, of course, they're specialists in this area. So welcome, gentlemen. Thank you for your time today. So quickly before we start with the session, what I want to just do quickly was actually run through the Australian Apartment Advocacy. So we're the voice of 2.5 million people in Australia who choose apartments. They call me the Erin Brockovich of apartments, which I love. But to be PC, I call myself the Apartment Ombudsman. So we do education, and of course we just launched the New South Wales Education Kit, which Ralf and Nathan feature in, which is awesome. We obviously lobby for change with government, we do research, and we also then act as an ombudsman, whether that's between apartment owners and developers or builders or strata managers, or actually even internally within the apartment complex. So there's our education kit and our apartment awards, which we'll be launching in Sydney or New South Wales next year. So I'm certainly going to be recommending that Ralf and Nathan look at our People's Choice, which is actually a entry for the Owners Corporation to actually enter if they've been doing excellent work, which you two have definitely been doing. So Ralf, talk to us. Obviously, you've been doing a lot of things, and I thought it was a very interesting story once I looked at your slides the other day. So tell us about what's been happening with you and Altair. Is that working now?
Okay.
Yeah, great.
All right. Okay. Well, hi guys. Hi everyone. As you can see, Ralf Harding. I'm from Altair Apartments. That's a lovely picture, a very old picture of Altair Apartments. If you could maybe flick on to the next slide, please, Sam. Okay. Maybe it would be quicker if you just popped on the whole slide rather than we tick through, because we'll be going forever otherwise. Okay, Altair, we have 141 lots, 19 levels. We have a full-time building manager, which effectively means he works Monday to Friday. We have 24/7 concierge, 3 pools, 2 gyms, and in 2002, sorry, we were voted by the International Congress as the best housing scheme in the world, and there's one line missing there. We have an annual budget of approximately $1.6 million plus GST. So if you could pop onto the next slide, please.
Ralf, I'm interested in that best housing scheme in the world. What was the criteria for that? Because that's a pretty impressive kind of title.
Well, we were not only the best housing scheme in the world, we were the best building in Asia Pacific. Our building, it has a thing called cross-flow ventilation, which was hot at the time. So our building, only the top couple of floors in the building, the rest of the building is not allowed to have air conditioning.
Yeah, right.
It is all done through this cross-flow ventilation, which is actually relevant in a number of other areas that we'll get through to. But anyway, that sort of list looks pretty impressive. It looks like we're going pretty well. But then if you can flick through to the next slide, please.
Yeah.
So if you put them all up, in 2009, we sued, no, sorry, you've gone one too far. We sued the developer, which was Australand, and spectacularly lost. We sued the developer for what we thought was a fortune in those days, 6.25 million in defects. Of course, that's chicken feed these days. However, we spent $1.5 million in legal fees, spectacularly failing. We had received $700,000 in pre-trial damages. We got a chartered accountant involved, and he told us that we were technically bankrupt. And the committee resigned en masse, which was kind of interesting because it was the very first committee meeting I ever attended as a member. This all happened and the entire committee resigned. And I was left holding the baby, so to speak. So if you could change slides, please.
That must have been a bit of a fright for you.
It was character building, I can say. It gave us the ability, however, to look forward with a new plan. I am a retired CEO, so I'm used to sort of business plans and stuff like that. So we generated, the building didn't have a plan. They had previously, like a lot of buildings, bought a capital works plan, but off the shelf.
Yeah.
And they, of course, are generic, and not only generic, but if you look at them carefully, they are generally for buildings that are not residential buildings, they're office blocks. So we got our building management company to start to create a capital works plan, which was tailored to our building and not generic. We update that annually, and it feeds into our 20-year financial plan. So if you could turn the page, I think we've got a slide out of sequence, but don't worry, that's fine. I just wanted to make, there is a famous saying in politics, never waste a crisis. And this gave us the opportunity to select a completely new committee and start with a blank canvas and a new plan. We actually had to have a $500,000 special levy, which added to the $700,000 that we had got in the pre-trial damages, gave us $1.2 million. And so we set ourselves the task of fixing the defects for $1.2 million, which we did.
Congratulations.
We then focused really on our 20-year financial plan, which is obviously the blueprint for the future. When we talk to people about a 20-year financial plan, they often say to me, well, one, how can you possibly have a 20-year financial plan? Who could ever see that far into the future? And two, why did you pick 20 years? Well, first of all, we are now in our 12th year of our 20-year financial plan, and I have to say it has been stunningly accurate. Some things are up and some things are down, but across a year, the financial plan has proved to be excellent in terms of predicting our costs. And secondly, why 20 years? We looked at a number of plans, and there are, as a hell of a sweeping generalisation, three key things, three really big ongoing expenses. Expense number one is waterproofing, which is ever ongoing, but if you've got serious waterproofing like we have across our roof, that needs to be addressed about every 10 years.
Yes, correct.
Secondly, if you have some sort of cladding or painting on the outside of the building, that tends to require addressing every 15 years. And the third thing is, if you're a building like us, you've got lifts. We've got 4 lifts, and the lifts need to be addressed every 25 years. So when we started this process was 2010. So we were sort of 9 years into the building, but we need a 20-year financial plan to cover all of those activities. In fact, we are working on our lifts right now. We have just finished one of the 4 lifts. But that's big money. I mean, we're talking about $1.5 million on the lifts. And when we have finished the lifts, we're going to have a 25-year plan because that will be required to address the lifts going forward. But anyway, this 20-year financial plan has saved our lives. It's not just the blueprint for the future, it is an essential guide to long-term planning. It smooths out the annual ups and downs, so you don't find yourself in a situation where you're doing the budget and think, whoa, crikey, we didn't increase the levies last year, but we're going to have to increase them 5% next year because we're going to address this, that, or the other thing. If you look at it over a 20-year cycle, it allows you to smooth everything out. And since 2009, the Altair levies have increased 2% every year and will increase 2% next year. And in that time, there's another line to that slide, we will have spent over $6 million on capital works. And we have been able to do that. We've had some massive years and some small years, but we've been able to look long term and say, if we increase our levies 2% a year, every year, we're going to be able to cope with all of that. Can you move to the next slide, please? Okay, sustainability, which is what this is all about today, has always been, a key part to a plan, because we tend to look at things from a very business-like perspective. And another way of explaining sustainability is spending money to save money. And that's only possible if you have a plan. Now, as it happens, we live in the City of Sydney Council area. And years ago, and I believe they still offer these, but years ago, they offer grants for energy audits. And we leapt on the bandwagon and got an energy audit grant. And I've had a funny feeling it was about $5,000, but I can't remember exactly. Anyway, they asked us if we would use their consultant, which is a crowd called Sustainability Now, and we did. And I am very happy to recommend Sustainability Now to anybody else who's looking at that sort of thing. And I just include the name of the CEO there, Ethan Burns, who is very passionate about the subject, but also has got his feet fairly squarely on the ground. So I have no hesitation in recommending Sustainability Now and Ethan Burns to anyone who wants to get into that sort of territory. Next slide, please. Okay, so the sort of opportunities that came out of that, first of all, I've said to you that we had 3 pools. They're all gas heated. As it happens, my apartment on the 17th floor looks down on the pools, and in the middle of winter, you could see steam sort of billowing into the atmosphere. So that was the first thing that we addressed in 2012. The capital cost of doing that was $55,000. The payback, the maths suggested a 4-year payback. In fact, it was more like a 3-year payback. Interestingly, most pool covers apparently are designed for interior pools, not exterior pools, and the sun causes massive damage to the pool covers. And we not only get extensive sun, but we are in a little hurricane alley. We are in King's Cross Road, and our site is exactly where the windmills used to be in King's Cross, and it's an incredibly windy site, and the covers get absolutely hammered. The covers, however, have lasted 10 years, and we have replaced them this year. So they've certainly paid for themselves. Yes, so you can go to the next slide, thank you. The next thing, I'm sure everybody has looked at this, and that is changing fluorescent lighting to LED. We did that in 2018. The capital cost was $64,000. And I say there the payback was 18 months. It was probably even less than that. It probably paid for itself in the first year that we did it. Okay, next slide.
Just quickly, Ralf, the payback was 18 months, but what kind of saving have you seen every year since you did those LED change outs?
Oh, well, I mean, we got a payback. We saved about $40,000 in the first year. It really was an absolute no-brainer. Okay, the pools were all gas heated. We have changed them to heat pumps. We did that in 2019. The capital cost of that was $60,000. The payback was between 2 and 3 years for that. And the irony of that situation is that now we have changed from gas to heat pumps. It has lowered the cost of heating the pool to the point that it's debatable whether it'll make mathematical sense to keep the covers on the pools when they need to be replaced in 10 years' time, because we've saved so much money on heating the pools that it possibly doesn't warrant recovering the pools again, but we'll review that when we get to it.
Interesting.
The next one is carbon monoxide car park monitoring. Many of you probably don't know that you have a thing in your car park that sucks the carbon monoxide out of the car park. Ethan Byrne recommended we put in some monitoring, and what the monitoring does is that it monitors the level of carbon monoxide, and when it is low, in other words, during the daytime when there's no one here, for example, it turns the fans off and then turns them back on again when the carbon monoxide gets up. It's not a lot of money, as you can see, $8,000, but it pays back over 2 years. So once again, bit of a no-brainer. Then solar. Solar is an issue that everybody looks at. The capital cost of we have got a flat roof and it faces north. And everybody says, well, that's an absolute Monty for solar. Why haven't you guys got solar? The capital cost of putting solar on our roof is about $130,000. Altair looks pretty straightforward and simple, but it is in fact a very difficult site, apparently. We have safety, access and connectability issues with the site. We have had Ethan look at the site twice and worked up a whole program. And then last year, he recommended that we use another separate independent consultant to look at the whole thing. So we did it all again last year. And there's some more lines there, Samantha. A really important part is we have an exterior waterproofing seal right across the roof. Anyway, the payback from the exercise we ran last year was 38 years. So unsurprisingly, we have not proceeded with that. However, we keep a watching brief, and in fact, sustainability now came back to us about 6 weeks ago and said there is a new way of, or a new technology associated with solar panels and a new way of attaching them to the roof, which might make it worth you looking at it again. And so we are doing that right now.
Well, good on you. Good on you.
Next
and also
slide.
the other thing too, you've got to be very careful with too, Ralf, is that like with the waterproofing, like if you have to redo the waterproofing in 10 years time, you're going to have to take all of those panels off, right?
You're absolutely right, Samantha. That has been a huge deal to us, and there are fundamentally two ways to approach it. You can have the panels attached to the roof, but that, by the very nature of the way it's connected, interferes with the waterproofing seal. Or you can build a grid across the roof and then put the panels sort of suspended, if you like.
Yes.
But that is it is a massive deal to disassemble everything and then maintain the waterproof seal and then put the panels all back in place again. It's a really serious, huge deal. And there is no way to get to the roof of our building with anything substantial other than a crane. Yes. And the City Council are very, very anti-cranes. Yeah. So getting a crane, and it's just fraught with drama, the whole thing. But anyway, we're looking at it again. Yeah. Righto. Electric vehicle charging, we've done it. We have retrofitted our building for electric vehicle charging. We did it last year. The capital cost was about $75,000. We got 3 quotes. We got 2 quotes. We're both of north of $200,000, and we got one for $75,000, but only if we did it right then. And so we did it right then. And we have got 4 levels of car park. So we've had to upgrade the subboards on all 4 levels to allow 200 connections. We have been warned that that might eventually put pressure on the building's electrical infrastructure, and it might require an upgrade when we hit 100 electric vehicles. I can tell you we have hit the magnificent sum of 3 at the moment, but it will probably cost us about $100,000 to upgrade, and so we are saving $20,000 a year for the next 5 years to address that upgrade.
But I would think, Ralf, that would actually increase the value of your building in terms of resale, because what we're finding at the moment, and you might have seen the ABC the other day actually commenting on this,
yes,
that what we're finding is that people are requesting the electrical vehicle charging points, and the majority of people are saying, well, let's not do it, because there's only a small number of people who want that charging station. But at the end of the day, it actually is going to continue to increase in demand, isn't it?
Well, we think so. Anyway, we've also put in cable ducting, so all of our residential car spaces, of which are about there 170, can hook up. We decided that we would not allow visitor car spaces because it's just all too hard. The EV owner pays the cost of the cabling back to the submains, but we have equalised that cost because we thought it was unfair for people who just happen to have a car space next to the subboard to pay less than somebody who was the other end of the building. Anyway, that's gone down. That's fine. All of the cabling becomes common property. The minute we've got a bylaw, the minute you hook up your cable to the submains, the cable becomes common property. So if the electrical vehicle owner leaves, then they take their smart charger with them, but the cabling remains. So as things grow, we will have a self-building system through the building. Okay.
That's really impressive that you've done that, and also that a bylaw, because that's when you become unstuck, isn't it? Because you're right, like this kind of infrastructure does belong to the building, and there is a cost to the owner, but at the end of the day, that then if you're thinking about, I heard a young guy the other day on the radio, and he was saying he hasn't got charging in his building, so he's having to drive to other locations, public car parks and EV charging stations, and try and charge his car there. But of course, he's only allowed to leave it there for 2 hours, and of course, as you know, you do often require 12 hours to recharge your car, right?
Well, yes, although the average electric vehicle can travel on a full charge around about 400 k's, but the average car in Sydney drives 36 k's a day.
Yeah.
And so if they come back and plug in and just top up, if you like, it takes about an hour.
Yeah.
So we massive sample. As I say, we've got three EVs in the building. The owners, I spoke to them actually as recently as about last week. They are absolutely delighted with the system. They think that all works tickety-boo, and they're very happy with it. So it's all good so far.
Saves you have to put a cable out from your window down to the car park.
Well, the mind boggles. Okay, well, next slide. Thanks. All right, we're also pretty heavily into recycling. We've got separate areas for recyclable rubbish, non-recyclable rubbish, plastic bags, polystyrene, cardboard, electrical items, security stuff that has to go away and be shredded. And if you keep going, we're part of the food scraps program. We have a large area items. We have a special collection for those Nespresso type coffee pod type things, which can all be recycled apparently.
Yes.
We've got plant-based collections, clothing, sharps, and we've got a charity selection. And next slide, can you see my cursor moving on that or not?
No. Do you want me to
No,
try?
okay, don't worry. Well, I won't. That's the cycle. I won't walk
But these
you
are
around
obviously
the
your...
recycling room. Don't worry. Just move on to the next slide, perhaps. Look, last year, City of Sydney came and actually audited us and gave us a lovely little letter telling us that we were the gold standard for recycling in strata. So that's just me beating my chest a bit. So next slide. Okay. Samantha particularly asked, how do you handle the owners in terms of costs and things like that, and how do you get things approved? We have everything in a plan, and our plan, we like to think, sorry, there is actually another thing on that slide. There we go, out of order. The critical thing is the plan's got to be transparent, it's got to be affordable, it's got to make business sense. And by that I mean it's got to demonstrate that it's fully fundable and paid back. It's got to be deliverable, and you've got to rigorously monitor it. There are two things that I get feedback from other buildings, and that is they all got carried away and decided that solar would be wonderful and we're going to whack solar in, but they didn't do the business case properly, and they didn't make sure that all the bits were added into the plan, and they're all disappointed afterwards that they're not getting the result that they thought they were going to get. And secondly, that they've done it with a burst of enthusiasm, but no one's monitored the program at all. So they've actually got no idea whether they've got a payback on it or not. And I have heard some pretty nasty disaster stories about things that just haven't been managed through. So if you move to the next slide, all Altair owners know that all projects are in our plan. The plan is sitting on the website. There are absolutely no surprises. They all know that their levies are going to go up 2% every year. The plan is approved for the next year by the owners at every AGM, and every project we have done since 2010 has been done on time and on budget, so that they know that the projects are going to happen. And I cannot remember a single owner of voting against a single sustainability project in the last 10 years. And that's me. Thanks very much.
That's awesome, Ralf. And I think you're totally right, is that, you do need to monitor. And I wish I could clone you and put you in every apartment building within Australia, because I think I would be very, very encouraged that there was someone actually being businesslike about the way they invest in their building and the way that they actually monitor and then obviously get the paybacks. Because at the end of the day, you can go off on a tangent and do these environmental initiatives, but they do have to have a dollar sign as well as also an environmental sign in front of them, don't you think?
Oh, well, if and when we're discussing it, if you do a business case, the business case either stacks up or it doesn't. And in our case, actually, there are a number of owners in the building who would love to have solar. Just emotionally, they would love to have solar. But you do the business case and they say, oh, okay, I get it. Okay, I understand why we don't have solar. And equally with all these other projects, we're able to line it up and say, okay, here are the benefits long term. We've got the money. We can pay for it. And they all go, oh, okay, that's fine. Yep.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay.
So we're going to go on to Nathan here. And so obviously, as you can see, Nathan has also had electronic vehicle charging stations installed into Zinc apartments. But Nathan, you're a little bit different, aren't you? Because you're much smaller than Altair. You're only about 45 apartments. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes, 45.
And so for you, obviously 20-year plan is probably not in your equation, but still you have to kind of like be very mindful of the fact that whatever you do is actually going to be kind of like cost more to each of the apartment owners than obviously Ralf with 100 and odd apartments in their building.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, there is a capital works plan, and there is some level of detail for sustainability in there. Nothing like the detail that Ralf has got. but we went through a similar journey with City of Sydney and the grants. We did it in a very iterative process. So we started off with the logic of having a third party to put behind what we wanted to achieve, to take the emotion out of some of the conversations and put some facts behind it. So we've done that for a number of phases. There was a couple of different. We started off with a assessment on consumption, then worked out what that was going to do, what the impact of a lighting upgrade, sensors, pumps being tweaked, all those things, what they would do, delivered on those, built some confidence, put one phase of solar in, built more confidence, put a second set of solar in, and it was just, and on it went, and all along the way. And so I knew where I wanted to get to, but we had to do it iteratively, because we had to prove the case along the way. And some of it, yes, it did stack up, but quickly I learned that for this apartment scale, and it's a general bugbear of mine, that the change the language away from payback to return on investment.
Yeah. Because
especially with things like solar and some of these initiatives, they're a lot longer and than perhaps people might think, and equally the cost of doing so and the value versus the value it adds is really quite different as well. So we took that angle and similarly had a lot of success, and a lot of interest, and almost nothing. I think it's not quite as amazing as Ralf, but certainly everything we put forward with the right amount of backing, we've got that level of engagement from an early stage, got supported.
Yeah.
So then beyond those first three initiatives, been the consumption reductions, which came in various parts, 2 phases of solar installation, and similarly we're actually very lucky. North facing building, almost zero shadowing, but basically perfect for solar. So very lucky with that regard. Then the next phase beyond that was actually getting the EV chargers in. So we basically had a solution where we put in the flat cable in the building. The building was well set up from a capacity point of view, from an electricity capacity infrastructure perspective, so that was fine. We had the studies done on the consumption. We had a couple of little monitoring devices which we used along the way, so we had that on a ready data as well. So we used that as part of the analysis that we provided to our consultant, which is, for the sake of $800, a Watt Watchers device was probably the best thing we've done for our business cases. So we did that, and then the solution was for the EVs was to put the flat cable infrastructure around the car park, meaning that A, it was quite a relatively inexpensive solution, but B, it also future-proofed, so that there's only 30 spaces there, and there's 10 chargers in there now. Now, those 10 chargers are so positioned that each car has got access to at least 1, if not 2 chargers due to the length of the cable. So it's going to be a long time before we're going to need more. But equally, if people do want one that's dedicated to them, then they can install it, and the infrastructure is set up there for that, and it's going to be an inexpensive installation. The chargers that we've got there, they're all user pays, so we've set a rate at a cents per kilowatt hour, which we can vary. It works on all the chargers, despite the branding, they work on all cars with that connection point, so it's future-proof from that perspective as well. As a strata, we've got control over who's going to install additional charges as well, so we can manage it the same way, but we manage it and standardize it anyway. That was part of the logic. So yeah, it does because it's absolutely user pays, and in the future the software will flex and it will become dynamic charging as well. It's not set up for it yet, but it will become dynamic. So what does that mean? It means that it'll be according to the price. So if they've got excess solar in the building, people can charge for free. If they decide to charge in peak periods when there's no solar, then that'll get charged accordingly. So that's what the future of that piece looks like. And then the piece that's just been finished now. So the first 2 phases of solar was there's I think about 9 kilowatts and 17 kilowatts in there. We've just added in another 70 kilowatts, so 70. and that's all for direct apartment use. So it's an equitable share. So each apartment has got a share of the electricity generated by solar from this last system, the third system, based on their units of entitlement. So every month, that unit will get the relevant allocation of solar. And it's it's a sole share system, so there's a real supply and demand algorithm in there. So it just really maximizes what the building has got and then allocates it according to the demand. Then over a period, it balances it out so that every apartment gets the right amount of electricity from solar. So that's really powerful. And then similarly, in terms of that's the allocation, but the cost of that system as well was allocated equitably in terms of the units of entitlement. So from a special levy perspective, it was really balanced and really fair and worked out beautifully. So
I love the fact that you're being very flexible, like you're allowing for the technology that you've installed to actually kind of like, adapt and move as part of how we evolve, because I'm sure, as Phil will talk shortly, like we're just on the early journey, especially with electrical vehicle charging stations, right?
Correct. And it generally, all of these things take a lot, especially when it gets to individuals and car spaces and who pays. It's all equitable. So similarly with the solar, so it makes perfect sense, and it stands the pub test.
Yes.
And I think the next solution, which will be around the corner, will be it's just to tap the batteries into. Not that we've got batteries yet, but that's going to be the next phase. And tap that into a user pay system as well. So that'll be in my mind, that's going to be a self-funding piece. Both for now and then for replacement in the future.
Now, you've been an advocate for environmental initiatives since you were a young wee boy, haven't you, Nathan? So how do you feel about actually seeing this come to fruition within your apartment building?
Oh, honestly, I'm really pleased, I'm pretty proud of it. And I guess the frustrating thing, and there's always a frustration, is that when I look at it and step back and go, if I'm really harsh with myself, it's great, and a lot of people think fantastic, but it's just the fact that it's taken 5, 6, 7 years to do, essentially install a bunch of solar panels, get some lighting upgrades, and get some EV chargers put in place. Is a little bit frustrating because we haven't got that amount of time, and we haven't got that amount of time for everyone else to put in the sort of work that I have, and no doubt Ralf and many others have, to get to these points. So I think structurally, we need to make some seismic changes to allow buildings to be designed and engineered to the right standards from new, and have some easy funding retrofit models, which is obviously that we've got, so that we can, whatever that model is, whether it's a state government model or a council model, to provide funding that can be on payback all these upgrades. So very proud, but also I think I'm hoping that somewhere along the line we can accelerate this, because there's some great case studies out there, but they are just case studies, and we need it to be commonplace.
I agree with you, and I know that the government is actually providing funding support for infrastructure with electric vehicle charging stations, but probably not nearly as enough as they would like to. And I'm sure there will be some kind of tax down the line if you have an EV car, in terms of them paying for the other infrastructure on the roadside. So I think champions like yourself and Ralf need to actually be given the kind of like extra cream on the top, so to speak, with funding to allow you to kind of like showcase these and encourage other apartment buildings to go down the same pathway. So Phil, tell me, are you finding that developers are becoming more conscious about this new infrastructure, and also then looking to actually meet the demand that's happening from the market for this kind of like technology?
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Yes and no, I would say. I think developers are really driven by two things. They're driven by the market, and there is a groundswell of, I guess, support for buying developments that have sustainable initiatives, but more so governments regulating. So I think the building code that's coming out this year, I think it's this year, mandating EV charging ready car spaces is really shifts the goalposts very significantly and quickly. If you're just relying on market forces,
Yes.
and developers would move a lot slower.
Yes, they would.
But I think so. I think it's a mixture of both. But it's certainly gaining a lot of momentum. And then interestingly, you know, and I really think that Ralf and Nathan have done an amazing job, because that is two incredible case studies. But you can see from the amount of work that Ralf and Nathan have had to put into it that it's not something that every committee wants to take on, because you haven't got such active committees all the time. And that's what we find, because we, you know, as a company that looks after the energy, you know, the embedded network space and the energy requirements for, you know, upwards of 1,000 apartment buildings around the country, you know, we find that most of them just don't know where to start. And that's half the problem, because you'll you know, we had a stall at a Strata Communities booth a few months ago now, just specifically to talk about EV charging in buildings, and we had 150 people come up to us and give us their name and say, can you come and talk to our committee about this, because we've just got no idea.
Yeah.
And I think that's half the issue, is that where do you start? Because everyone's selling solar and everyone's selling, you know, EV, and everyone's putting downlights in, but you know, how do you put it all together? And I think that's I think that the piece that I heard from both Ralf and Nathan is they sought that help from someone overarching to look at it for them and do the business case, not on emotion, but rather from a straight out business perspective. And that's, I think, where we find that we add the most value. It's not necessarily a technical piece. It's the consultant overlooking it for them. And so we find that's been a big driver, and the big shift in the EV space has been, and I note that Nathan and Ralf, you're leading the way. The big shift has been 5 years ago. It was really a case of, let's get a couple of EV chargers in the visitors' car parks, because then we're an EV ready building. Well, no, you're not. If it's not in my car park, it's no good.
Yeah.
If I'm buying $1 million apartment or a $500,000 apartment, I want to plug my EV charger in right where I'm parking it.
Yes.
And so I think that's been a real shift, and that's really where the market's been driven. And probably WA has been, Sam, your neck of the woods, where you're really driven this market. The EV charging world has really been, and sustainability in general has been driven by from WA more than anywhere.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting to hear. And certainly the City of Sydney, and of course Clover Moore, the Mayor, has certainly championed this situation. And obviously both Nathan and Ralf were actually recipients of a grant that allowed them to actually go ahead and do these kinds of audits. But you're right, you do need external help to actually get you, you know, to the point where you need to be, to actually then start putting infrastructure in place that you know is going to suit your building and also the residents. So Ralf and Nathan, what were your biggest challenges for getting started?
Well, if I could speak first, Nathan, really, there are two things that we have done in this building that have made a huge difference, and one of them is the 20-year plan.
Yeah.
That is utterly fundamental. And the second thing you will think is silly, but this would apply to all big buildings. I have a meeting every Wednesday at 2 o'clock with the building manager, and I make sure that meeting is all about making sure things happen.
Yeah.
So, you know, I've spoken to other committees and they say, oh, we have our committee meeting and then nothing happens till the next committee meeting and we all jump up and down and then, you know, we wonder about it. Well, I meet with our guy every Wednesday and he knows he's got a to-do list, which he makes up and sends to me, and does minutes of the meeting afterwards. and it shows who's doing what and by when and how much money's been approved, and those things just get done. But the biggest challenge to getting started is to get the plan.
Yeah.
And, you know, once you've got the plan, you can see what the hurdles are in front of you. But if, in fact, the longer the plan, actually the easier the task, because you can smooth things out. And the tasks don't look so daunting. I mean, you know, if I'm sure if we'd started this whole process and I'd said, I can guarantee you all that you'll only have to put your levies up 2% a year forever, and I can do all of these things, everyone would have said, whoa, go for it.
Nathan,
and
your
second point, how you deal with the naysayers, is to just distill it down to a business case. Now, you know, if Nathan wants to do it on return on investment as opposed to payback, that's fine. I mean, in my humble opinion, they're two sort of descriptors of largely the same process. But if you can make a clear business case, it's very hard for them to argue against.
Yeah, I agree. Nathan, the biggest challenges for you for getting started?
I think the biggest challenge was more about getting the right people externally to provide a solution. There was lots of people that wanted to provide what they knew, but not provide a holistic solution or steer in the direction of a holistic pathway. So a lot of the solutions, which is why I was really keen to future-proof a lot of things, and then that everything could be iterative. But actually getting to that point was really difficult, and I think that'll be very different now, because the industry, renewable industry, and all the support industries around it has come along leaps and bounds. But at the time, so 2015, 16, when this started here for me, a lot of it was just a lot of guesswork, and then just me, let's say, persistence beats resistance. So I think that was the biggest challenge. The easiest part was actually, you know, from an owners and a committee point of view, because it's a large part of what I do for a living as well. Not that technically, but that sort of level of engagement and that sort of problem solving. But I think what I will say is that within the committee, not everyone was completely aligned, but I think there's always an angle. Everyone's got their own drivers. Some people will be, you know, super keen on renewables at any cost. Some people will be thinking about their superannuation because their retirement's a couple of years away, etc., etc. So there's always an angle, and you talk to each of those people with relevant angles, and then get some third parties in there as well. And I think the key learning is, you know, start from really good base data. Literally the little $800 consumption supply and demand monitoring device for the building, which I didn't have until relatively recently, would be the most powerful piece of kit that we've had, because you can work out what device is doing what using what consumption, and what the building as a whole is doing as well. So I think if I'd had that right at the outset, that would have saved a lot of time and almost guesswork as well. Would I do it again? Yes, now that I've got the tools to do so, because it'd be a lot quicker, and we've got evidence behind it.
And would you recommend it to other buildings? Like, have you ever gone to another building and talked to them about what you've been doing?
Yeah, a few times. There's been a few buildings that have come to me as well. Yeah. And actually just come out of, you know, stood on the roof, or looked at the notice board, or looked at the charges, etc. So yes, but I think there's a lot of lone wolves out there who are trying their hearts out, and it's baffling. Yeah. And that's where I think we need some strategic direction and policy to support it.
Yeah, and definitely leadership. Good on you, Nathan. And what about you, Ralf? Were there any learnings that you would suggest to any apartment buildings before they kind of like get out on this journey, besides the 20-year plan, darling? I knew you would say that.
Well, it helps to have a supportive committee.
Yes.
And I personally, you know, we have a committee of 9. We have an average turnover of 3 people a year on that committee. And so I've been the chair now for, I'm coming up for 14 years. So we've had a lot of people on that committee. I would think that, let's say that we had a total of 50 people over that period. I would say we have had 2 or 3 genuinely negative people. And they generally move on because they recognise that they're out of step with the committee. But you know, if you've got 9, even in a building with 141 people, if you've got 9 positive people in the building, it's a fabulous base to move from.
Correct. And it's very hard, I know, because and you would have known this with the defect repairs, that some people just think they're going to move into an apartment building and they just lock up and leave, and they don't realise they're actually living in an asset. I call it an asset. I say it doesn't matter if your building is $20 million, $40 million, or $100 million. The likelihood of you owning that kind of asset again in your life is probably nil, right? So
well, we have just had our building revalued at about $110 million.
Wow. And
so it's a small business, and people say you run this place like a business, and I say absolutely, it is a small business.
It is a business. I wouldn't even say small, Ralph. But at the end of the day, I always say to people, when you sit down at the committee level, you have to put your business hat on and you say, what's the best thing for this community and what's the best thing for this building? And a lot of people find that hard to kind of understand. Do you think?
Oh, well, I can remember in the early days, because we literally had no money. I mean, we were technically bankrupt. And we were looking at things like, you know, maybe we don't need 24/7 concierges, you know, maybe we could cut back their hours, you know, and things like that. Maybe we could, I mean, we looked at such sort of silly, piquant things like maybe we should turn off the heating for the swimming pools in the winter and things like that. And the response I would get, oh, but this is our home. And I would respond to that saying, we're not interested in your home. Your home is what goes on in your apartment. We are actually talking about all the bits around the outside of your apartment. And if you don't run that like a business, you're going to get into trouble, in my opinion.
Exactly right. Oh, you're singing off the same hymn sheet as me, darling, I tell you.
Can I just say something
Please,
that I've noticed is that, you know, I'm an old project manager and tradesman at heart, and one of my mantras is monitor what you need to measure, what you need to manage, and I think, you know, you both Ralph and Nathan have said it. It's no point doing initiatives if you don't know if it worked or it didn't work. Because so many initiatives, we spend a lot of money on them and then they actually don't deliver what we need to deliver. And I think that is a really good practice, because it forces you to be efficient with your spending. Because if you know it works or it doesn't work, that's a really good practice to get into.
Absolutely.
Well, you know, I totally agree with that, with those comments from Paul. But it is interesting. I'm quite interested in business, and there has been a mantra recently about SCG, which is all, you know, about different measures, and it's collapsing all around the world because they're unmeasurable. And as Paul says, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And so we need to have measurable criteria that we can monitor and manage. And in fact, there's a guy in our building that you will all know, but I won't say his name. He's quite famous in Strata, and he's always on about motions and stuff like that. And I have said to him previously, with apologies to Edison, that managing a Strata building is 1% motions and 99% management, money, and maintenance.
The 3 M's. Well, I agree, and I do believe that, you know, as you know, we've talked about the National Construction Codes, but ESG is actually going to also be a major driver as we move forward. And you know, you see some companies such as Mirvac, you know, embracing the fact that they're, you know, totally carbon neutral. So there's always going to be leaders in the pack, right? And there's going to be others that actually will always hang back. And I'm very sorry, Ralph, that it was Australand that built your apartment building, and then obviously we're not forthcoming in terms of then assisting you with your defects, because at the end of the day, you know, this is what we bang on about, is quality in terms of the build, but also being a reputable developer. And so when something is not right, you fix it. You don't just leave it up to the owners to sort it out, right?
Well, they sued us for legal costs and we had to pay them.
Oh dear, that's not good. So Phil, before we wrap up, is there anything that you would like to talk to in terms of what you're seeing in the industry, where we're moving, what you think the future might hold for us?
Look, the big shift we're seeing is really a shift to 100% electric. So I think that's a given. We're going to get there. There's a bit of a way to go yet with hot water, because of the requirements, the physical requirements in a heat pump system. It doesn't suit everyone, but it's coming. That's the big shift for us. So, you know, our goal has always been to, as close as possible, to get buildings to be not just carbon neutral, because you can become carbon neutral fairly easily, but self-sustaining. So as close as possible to not reliant on the grid. And at the moment, that looks like putting as much solar on the roof as you possibly can, and EV chargers and potentially battery storage. But I think we'll get to a point, you know, my view is that we'll get to a point where we've got, you know, a whole fleet of EV cars that are feeding vehicle to grid back into the building at the end of the day, which is then feeding the building. So I think the next 10 years is pretty exciting, and you know, I say just well done to everyone who's having a go at it, and don't be put off if it's hard, because the rewards are certainly there. And my contact details are on the screen there if anyone wants to contact me with regards to this, or creating community energy networks in general. Please contact me.
And it was interesting hearing Nathan talk about his little tool that kind of like monitors where the power is being used, and, you know, what's happening with it and when it peaks and that kind of thing, because of course, Phil, WINconnect actually has that with an app, don't you? So once you actually do install that kind of network within a building, individuals can actually monitor their usage in their own apartments. And I know there's been a number of apartment owners who really enjoy seeing how they can actually change their habits to reduce their power bills, because let's face it, that's going to continue to increase, isn't it? Yeah,
actually that's a good point. And you know, again, being a tradesman at heart, you know, the biggest sustainability measure you can ever have is switching something off when you don't need it.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think we can automate, and we do need to automate things and generate as much as we possibly can. But if you can change behaviors, then you will make as big a difference as a technology can. And that's where, you know, people will change. I'll tell you a little story. We had it was a hotel actually that we put a very smart environmental sort of air conditioning system in, and it was supposed to reduce power by 25%, and it just didn't. It reduced it by 10%. And so what they did, this wasn't our doing, this was the engineer's idea actually at the hotel. He put a big green button in every single hotel room, and under the button said, to save energy, push this button. And immediately they reduced their power to below the 25%. And on top of that, they put a screen in the foyer showing how it was affecting it immediately. And so people want to know that they're doing the right thing. Yeah. So that immediacy of understanding what they're doing was really powerful. So I just thought that was an indicative of, you know, people really want to do the right thing, but they want to know that they're doing the right thing too.
That's a great story. And I think that's right. You have to make it simple, keep it simple, stupid, as they say. You have to make it simple, and you have to make it transparent. And both Nathan and Ralph touched on being transparent, right? So that everybody can see how what their behaviours are doing to actually have a positive impact. And people do want to actually have a positive impact. It's a matter of saying, how do I do it within my busy day and within my life, so it's not actually increasing what I need to do any further. So thank you, everybody, for obviously speaking today. We've got another session on the 18th of October, in fact, about EV stations and predicting into the future, and that's going to be with Phil again, with WINconnect. And then on the 20th of October, we're talking about mould and its health impacts, and that's primarily because we're coming into that wet season, especially in North Australia, and with national construction codes making apartments airtight, that's a bit of a problem for us. But, you know, we are certainly continuing to try and keep talking about these matters that are happening within apartments, so people actually feel like they're actually kind of like, you know, in control of what's going on. As always, we can't do what we do without support from our sponsors, and obviously WINconnect is one of those. So thank you to Phil and the team at WINconnect. And certainly I've really enjoyed today's session because, you know, for me, when I actually did the education kit, and actually then had a chance to actually work with the likes of Nathan and Ralf to write the extra booklet, which we hadn't written in any other state except for New South Wales. I was really impressed by their leadership. I was impressed by their commitment, and I felt that it was worthy of actually taking it now to an online event. So thank you, Ralf and Nathan, for A, doing what you're doing and your contribution to the apartment community, and then B, joining us today, because you certainly have helped us understand how, yes, it can be difficult to make change, but once you get started, then the process is only a matter of just perpetuation, correct?
Indeed. Okay.
Lovely. Thank you so much. And thank you, Phil, today as well for joining us and for your insight, obviously, from your technical perspective. So have a great weekend. And I'm sure our paths will cross again soon. And thank you once again for your time today.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Cheers.
Thanks for having me.